Welcome to my channel. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone leaves everything behind to follow a dream? Imagine stepping out of your home one day and not coming back for almost 30 years. Sounds impossible, right? But this is the real story of Ibn Battuta, a man who walked across deserts, crossed oceans, survived storms, met powerful kings, and wrote it all down. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not just a travel story. It's a journey of courage, discovery, and finding your true purpose in life. Chapter 1. The Call to Journey. A young man with a big dream. In the year 1325, in the quiet city of Tangier, Morocco, a young man stood at a crossroad, not just of roads, but of life. His name was Ibn Battuta. He was only 21 years old, full of energy, and filled with a deep desire to do something meaningful. Like many young people of his time, he was raised in a world where most people lived and died in the same town. But Ibn Battuta was different. He had a goal: to perform the Hajj, the holy pilgrimage to Mecca. That was his first dream. But deep inside, there was something more. Something was calling him. A voice that said, "Don't just stop at Mecca. Go further, see the world, learn from it." That voice would change his life forever. Leaving home in the 14th century was not easy. There were no phones, no maps, and no safe highways. The world was full of dangers: deserts with no water, bandits who robbed travelers, diseases with no cure. But Ibn Battuta was brave. He said goodbye to his family, his friends, his comfort, and stepped into the unknown. Can you imagine doing that? Leaving everything behind without knowing when, or if, you'd ever return? His heart was full of fear, but also full of hope. That first step out of Tangier was not just the start of a journey. It was the start of a transformation. As he walked east toward Egypt, Ibn Battuta began to understand how big the world really was. The Sahara Desert seemed endless. Sand stretched for days with only small towns in between. He traveled by camel, stopping at caravans where other travelers rested. These moments were full of learning. Around the campfire, people shared stories, songs, and ideas. He listened carefully. He asked questions. He wrote down what he saw and heard. This is where his journey changed. He was no longer just going to Mecca. He was becoming a student of the world. When he finally reached Cairo, Ibn Battuta was amazed. The city was alive with sound, color, and movement. There were huge mosques, busy markets, and scholars teaching in the streets. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. But the most important part was how much he learned. Cairo was a center of knowledge, and Ibn Battuta spent his days talking to scholars and exploring places of learning. The more he learned, the more he wanted to see. Mecca was still ahead, but now the journey itself had become just as important. Then came one of the biggest moments of his early journey: his arrival in Mecca. After months of travel, he completed the Hajj. It was a spiritual and emotional experience. He prayed with people from all over the world. He saw different faces, languages, and cultures all united by faith. But something strange happened. Most pilgrims, after finishing Hajj, went home. Ibn Battuta didn't. He felt something deep inside, a whisper that said, "There's more for you out there." It was in Mecca that he realized he was not ready to return home. In fact, he had only just begun. From this moment on, Ibn Battuta was no longer just a pilgrim. He was a traveler with a purpose. His goal was now to explore the Muslim world, to seek knowledge, meet people, and understand different cultures. What makes this part of his story so powerful is that he didn't have a map, a guidebook, or even a clear plan. All he had was a deep inner voice telling him to keep going. And that voice, that instinct, is what led him to become one of the greatest travelers in history. This was the true beginning of his journey. From the dusty roads of Morocco to the holy streets of Mecca, Ibn Battuta had taken the first steps toward his true path. He didn't know what was waiting for him in the future. The kings he would meet, the lands he would cross, or the dangers he would face. But he knew one thing for sure. The world was calling, and he was ready to answer. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll follow Ibn Battuta as he leaves Mecca and steps into a much bigger adventure, one filled with surprises, wisdom, and even danger. Chapter 2. The world opens up from pilgrim to explorer. After completing the Hajj in Mecca, most pilgrims were ready to return home. But for Ibn Battuta, going back was not an option. As he walked the streets of the holy city, hearing languages he didn't understand and meeting people from places he had never heard of, something inside him shifted. The world felt bigger than ever, and he knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning. What started as a journey for faith was slowly turning into a life of discovery. Ibn Battuta was no longer just a pilgrim. He was becoming an explorer. From Mecca, he began to travel farther, through Iraq, Persia, Syria, Palestine, and beyond. Each new land brought something new. Different food, new languages, unfamiliar traditions. For a young man from Morocco, this was both exciting and overwhelming. But Ibn Battuta had a gift. He was curious, respectful, and open. He listened carefully to others, observed closely, and made friends wherever he went. He was also highly educated in Islamic law, which helped him connect with scholars and leaders across the Muslim world. That education became his passport. It opened doors and earned him respect. In Baghdad, once the heart of the Islamic world, he walked among ruins and learned about the great empire that once ruled from there. He saw how cities rose and fell. In Damascus, he was amazed by the mosques, libraries, and lively markets. He even joined other scholars to study hadiths and law. Wherever he went, he didn't just pass through. He stayed, studied, and soaked in the culture. This part of his life was like a university without walls. Every city was a classroom, every person a teacher, and every moment a lesson. One of the most exciting moments during this time was his journey to the port city of Aden in Yemen. There, for the first time, he saw the Indian Ocean. For a man who had walked across deserts, seeing the endless blue sea was like discovering a new universe. Ships came in and out, carrying spices, cloth, gold, and stories from India, China, and Africa. Ibn Battuta stood at the edge of the land, watching the waves, and felt a new kind of pull. The ocean was calling. He wanted to go where the ships were going. And so, instead of heading west toward home, he turned east, toward India. But it wasn't a straight journey. First, he sailed down the coast of East Africa, visiting places like Mogadishu, Mombasa, and Kilwa. These cities were full of life, with people trading goods and ideas across cultures. He saw how Islam connected people across huge distances, how Arabic was spoken in markets in both Arabia and Africa. He saw African kings who ruled powerful cities, wore fine clothes, and followed the same religion as people in Morocco. This experience opened his eyes. The Muslim world was not just in the Middle East. It was everywhere, from the deserts of North Africa to the islands of the Indian Ocean. Everywhere Ibn Battuta went, he recorded details: what people wore, how they prayed, what they ate, how women were treated, how leaders ruled. He wasn't just passing through. He was collecting knowledge, not for power or wealth, but to understand the human experience. His journal became a mirror reflecting the beauty, the complexity, and the contradictions of different cultures. And the more he traveled, the more he realized that no two places were exactly the same, yet all were connected. But the journey wasn't always smooth. He often faced danger. Sometimes he was robbed. Other times he fell sick or nearly starved. Once a sandstorm nearly killed him. But he never gave up. His will was strong, and his belief in a greater purpose kept him moving. What gave him the strength? Maybe it was his faith. Maybe it was his passion for learning. Or maybe it was the simple joy of discovering something new every day. One of the most powerful turning points came when he met travelers who told him stories about India. They spoke of a powerful sultan in Delhi who welcomed scholars and judges from around the world. They said the sultan was rich but unpredictable, dangerous even. But he loved knowledge. To Ibn Battuta, it was an opportunity, a way to continue his journey and use his skills. Without hesitation, he agreed. He would travel to India. That single decision would change everything. His journey would no longer just be about seeing new lands. It would involve politics, danger, power, and deep personal tests. But he didn't know that yet. All he knew was that the road was calling again, and he was ready to follow it, even if it took him farther from home than ever before. In the next chapter, we'll follow Ibn Battuta into India, where his journey takes a dramatic turn. He enters the court of one of the most mysterious rulers in history, faces betrayal, travels to the Maldives and Sri Lanka, and sails toward China. So stay with me. The adventure is only getting bigger. Chapter 3. Into the Unknown. India, Danger and Discovery. As Ibn Battuta set his eyes on India, he was no longer just a young man following a dream. He was now a respected traveler, a learned scholar, and someone who had seen the vastness of the Muslim world. But what awaited him in India was unlike anything he had faced before. The journey itself was long and dangerous. He crossed rugged mountains, deep forests, and rivers filled with crocodiles. Along the way, he joined caravans for safety and slept under the stars. His goal? To reach Delhi, the capital of a powerful empire ruled by Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq. When he finally arrived in Delhi, the city was loud, crowded, and full of life. Markets were busy with people from every corner of Asia. Turks, Persians, Arabs, Africans, and Indians all mixed together. Elephants walked beside camels, and temples stood near mosques. It was a city of both beauty and chaos. But what stood out most was the Sultan himself, a ruler known not only for his great power, but also for his unpredictable nature. Some said he was brilliant, others said he was cruel. Many feared him. Ibn Battuta met the Sultan, and thanks to his deep knowledge of Islamic law, he was quickly offered a position as a qadi, or judge. At first, this was a dream come true. He had respect, money, and a role in the royal court. But life in the palace was not as peaceful as he had imagined. The Sultan's mood changed often. He would reward a man one day and execute him the next. Everyone lived in fear. One wrong word could cost a life. Ibn Battuta had to be very careful, smart in his words, wise in his actions. Despite the danger, he stayed in India for several years. He judged cases, advised the Sultan, and learned about Indian culture. He was amazed by the richness of the land, the gold, the spices, the music, and the art. But at the same time, he saw the pain caused by the Sultan's harsh rule. He saw people suffer, and sometimes he felt like a stranger in a place too powerful for one man to change. Then came a turning point. The Sultan decided to send Ibn Battuta as an ambassador to China. It was both an honor and a test. The journey would be long and full of risk. But once again, Ibn Battuta said yes. He was ready. He left Delhi with a royal group of men, horses, and gifts for the Chinese emperor. But trouble began almost immediately. As they traveled through India's jungles, their group was attacked by rebels. Many were killed. Ibn Battuta was captured. His life was in real danger. But once again, fate was on his side. He escaped, rejoined the mission, and continued his journey to the coast. There, they prepared to sail for China. But before the ships could leave, a violent storm struck. The sea swallowed their ships, and many people died. Ibn Battuta lost almost everything, including the gifts for the emperor. He could have turned back, but he didn't. Instead, he took a different route. He traveled south to the islands of the Maldives. This unexpected stop became another chapter in his story. The people of the Maldives were kind, and they respected him. Once again, his knowledge of Islamic law brought him power. He was offered a high position as a judge and even married into a local family. Life was peaceful for a while. He enjoyed the beaches, the culture, and the slower pace of island life. But soon, politics and jealousy made things difficult. Once again, he had to leave. Next, he traveled to Sri Lanka, where he climbed Adam's Peak, a sacred mountain believed by Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus to be the footprint of the first man. This moment was spiritual. Standing at the top, surrounded by clouds, he reflected on how far he had come. He had crossed deserts, survived shipwrecks, escaped death, and now stood on the peak of a mountain far from home. But the journey still wasn't over. Finally, he sailed to China. He landed in cities like Guangzhou and visited the capital of the Yuan dynasty. What he saw shocked him. Clean streets, organized systems, paper money, and great respect for order. China was advanced, peaceful, and completely different from the lands he had visited before. He described the people as polite, the laws as fair, and the cities as beautiful. But even in this land of wonder, he felt a new feeling: homesickness. He had been gone for more than 2 decades. He had learned, grown, and changed. But he hadn't seen his family or his homeland in years. He began to feel that his journey was complete, not because he had seen everything, but because he had seen enough to understand something deeper. The world is full of difference, but also full of connection. And maybe it was time to bring those lessons back home. So he turned west again, ready to complete the circle. He had started as a young man with a simple goal: to go to Mecca. Now he was returning as a man who had seen almost the entire known Muslim world. But his story didn't end there. Because when he reached Morocco, something happened that gave him a new purpose. A purpose that would make sure his journey would never be forgotten. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll see how Ibn Battuta, after almost 30 years of travel, finally found his true path. Not just through his feet, but through his words. Chapter 4: The Storyteller Returns, Finding His True Path. After nearly 30 years of non-stop travel, Ibn Battuta finally set his feet once again on Moroccan soil. He was no longer the young man who had left Tangier at 21. His beard was now gray, his eyes deeper, and his heart full of memories from a world few people could even imagine. But while the road had shaped him into a man of great knowledge and experience, returning home brought something unexpected: silence. Many of his family members had passed away. Friends he had once known had moved on or disappeared. The home he remembered was no longer the same. And just like that, the great traveler felt like a stranger in his own land. At first, it was hard. After so many years of movement, the stillness of home was strange. He had risked his life countless times. He had walked through jungles, crossed mountains, sailed through storms, and spoken with emperors. He had written nothing down, but his mind was full of people, languages, cities, smells, ideas. But now, with no one left to share it with, he wondered, what was it all for? What good were all these memories if no one heard them? That's when something important happened. The Sultan of Morocco heard of Ibn Battuta's return. He had heard tales of a man who had crossed the entire Muslim world, from North Africa to China. The Sultan was fascinated. He called Ibn Battuta to his court in Fez and made him a simple but life-changing request: tell us everything. But Ibn Battuta was not a writer. He had never kept detailed notes or written a book. His journeys had all been recorded in his mind. So the Sultan gave him a helper, a young scholar named Ibn Juzai. For months, Ibn Battuta spoke while Ibn Juzai listened, wrote, and organized. He told every story he could remember: the cities he had visited, the rulers he had met, the customs he had seen, and even the dangers he had survived. The result of their work became one of the most important travel books in history. Rihla, which means the journey. Through this book, Ibn Battuta's path became something greater than just a personal adventure. It became a gift to the world. His journey was no longer just about distance. It was about knowledge. He showed that even though people may dress differently, speak different languages, or live in distant lands, we share the same hopes, fears, faith, and curiosity. In a time with no airplanes or internet, he had connected cultures just by walking, observing, and listening. What made his story so powerful was not just where he went, but how he saw. He didn't just count the places he visited. He respected the people in those places. He didn't go to judge. He went to understand. That's what made his Ridla more than just a travel book. It was a window into the world of the 14th century, a world that feels distant, but through his eyes, feels close. But even after telling his story, Ibn Battuta didn't return to a quiet life. He later took smaller trips in Morocco and across North Africa, but his days of great adventure were over. What lasted was his message, that the world is wide, rich, and beautiful, and the more we learn about others, the more we understand ourselves. His words inspired generations of readers, travelers, historians, and thinkers. And even today, his journey continues to teach us. So how did Ibn Battuta find his true path? He didn't find it in gold, fame, or power. He found it by being open to people, open to learning, and open to the unknown. His true path wasn't a straight road. It was full of danger, surprise, and change. But through it all, he followed his curiosity and his faith. And in the end, his path became his purpose. Not just to travel, but to share, connect, and teach. His story reminds us that your path doesn't have to be clear from the beginning. Sometimes, the journey itself reveals the reason. And sometimes, your true path is not about where you go, but about what you do with what you learn.